Congress voted to release the Epstein Files. Donald Trump lost that battle. We're getting some of the files already from this whole bunch of emails, and there is a lot to come. We are learning a lot. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the Trump DOJ about what they release. I'm Ari Melber, a lawyer, MSN Now anchor, and this is going to be a breakdown where I do a couple things. One, I'm going to read some of these new released emails that implicate both Donald Trump, his longtime advisor, Steve Bannon. They've been thick as thieves when they were allies and on the campaign. They had a falling out, then they patched it up. But Bannon is more implicated in both Jeffrey Epstein's list of goals and emails and other networking than we previously knew. And he is, of course, a top Trump official. So that's something I'm going to read those new emails. I'm also in this breakdown after that going to go into the road ahead for the Epstein Files, and this will probably be something I do over several installments, because if you look at this like a lawyer or investigator, what we're going to get, what's going to be requested, and where the fights are going to be, there are at least, by my count, 5 main categories of the requested materials for the Epstein Files. And so today I'm going to talk about some of them coming up. I don't want to bury the lead, as we say in journalism, so I will tell you what I view, and you could cut it up different ways, as the key 5 categories from the Epstein Transparency Act are the data, documents, internal materials, etc. about these 5 things. The first Epstein case in Florida, including the secret deal of leniency that he got, how that came about. 2, the overarching activity, conduct, and alleged crimes, as well as some convicted crimes. Of course, he died before the big trial, in the Epstein story. 3, other people. That is something that we're already seeing from the first emails, which we believe are part of the Epstein Files. So in a way, even before Congress took the action to override Trump and Republicans dealt him the biggest loss he's had this term, we already got the 20,000 emails because of what Democrats started and Republicans then joined in releasing those. They have opened questions about other people. Not always meaning that if you're in the files you committed a sex crime or another terrible felony, although that is something worthy of investigation, but also people who were connected to this in all kinds of ways. And what I'm going to read to you about Bannon involves that. 4th, material about his death in custody. The Congress, on a bipartisan basis, has basically opened up what is a review of whether there was government misconduct there, whether the government covered something up, failed to safeguard him, whether there was foul play. That's a big deal. Some people tried to initially dismiss any question like that as a, quote, conspiracy theory. If investigating that's a conspiracy theory, the entire United States Senate, across all ideology, all Republicans and Democrats now think it's worthy investigation. And again, words, rhetoric gets thrown around. I try to deal with the facts from an investigative, journalistic, and legal sense. And so legally, that's an open question. Doesn't mean we know the answer. Category 5 is DOJ internal dealings, which are some of the hardest to get. There are legal protections generally for that, which includes the current alleged cover-up inside the Trump DOJ, which has upset everyone from Joe Rogan to Megyn Kelly to lawyers to Democrats, because they very clearly contradicted themselves, as well as prior DOJs. That could include Democratic administrations that have their own conflicts of interest, now that we're learning more and more, and some of it was known, but even more detail of secret emails about the different figures around different administrations in both parties. So those are kind of the 5. I actually just jotted this down. I'm going to get into that as part 2. Part 1, let's get into Steve Bannon emails. Again, there's been a lot discussed, some of it tied to Trump. I'm going to focus in on the review we've done, and I will say included in these emails is Jeffrey Epstein talking about an interview I did with Bannon in 2018. I didn't know until reading this, like anyone else, about that. But let's start with how they knew to keep their relationship secret. This was in 2018. Bannon had left the White House, and Epstein was a very discredited individual. You might say, well, duh, but he had had times where he was basically rehabilitating his reputation, which, as we've seen in the emails, with some top people. At this point, there was more heat, there was more pressure. He was more toxic in those elite circles than he had previously been considered. I'm saying that as an observation. Other people ethically could say he should be toxic and exiled ever since anyone learned about any of this. But in that context, they are emailing, and they don't think anyone's reading this because they're hatching a plan to hide their communication. Epstein writes to Bannon in New York tonight through Saturday, if you want to visit under the cover of darkness. And then they discuss, quote, access that's not the front door. Bannon says he believes, doesn't mean it's true, but he was in the government, and he believes, quote, they have 24/7 surveillance on you. So they come up with a plan to meet secret. That tells you that while they want to do business of some kind, or they want to communicate beyond email, and again, we don't have a record that we know of what they talked about that night, they knew to keep it secret. So right there you say, wow, these two people, this now deceased sex trafficker and this top White House Trump veteran meeting up. What might have been on their minds that year? We have clues from the emails. Bannon wanted to, he said, and he wrote, rehabilitate Epstein's reputation. Bannon says, quote, we must counter the narrative, quote, of a rapist who traffics in female children to be raped by the world's most powerful, richest men, a man who can't be redeemed. Bannon writes to Epstein, you are a lot of things which we will show, but you are not that. And what does he mean we will show? Well, according to the emails, and this has been corroborated in public, Bannon has confirmed that they were working on a video. Bannon referred to it as a documentary, but knowing how much they're working together, it might be more of a promotional or rehab video that he called, as a working title, The Monsters. That video hasn't come out. Bannon has lately said that maybe it'll come out next year. Then when you look at the media, they talked about populism, selling Trump tax policy, things that we might call traditional politics, but they also would advise each other in both directions. So I just told you Bannon secretly trying to help Epstein redeem himself. People can judge what that's about. But then Bannon was doing this interview, and I learned about this for the first time from the email release, that Epstein was apparently watching and advising him. He seemed to know about in advance that Bannon was doing this. Was an interview with me, The Beat at the time on MSNBC. Epstein writes in August 2018 to Bannon, I took off early so I could land in time to watch, all good. If you have your own jet, I guess you control when it takes off. The exchange is quite striking because Bannon says his team loved it. He was too focused, he says, to basically maybe have an immediate reaction. Epstein writes back, last 10 minutes were more the real you. I can tell you in the last 10 minutes of that interview, we had a back and forth the whole time, and I always give credit to anyone who's willing to come in and take the questions, and we had a full interview. In the end, I think they might have been referring to the fact that things get, over time, like any conversation, even when you're interviewing someone in public or they know it's on TV, over time you're human, and so you kind of loosen up and you get back and forth, you get a rhythm for each other. And there was some, I think, energetic back and forth about his view of the press and whether they were covered fairly, and I was asking questions about what's fair in the Trump administration, what's fair game, and there was some of that back and forth. I just say that for context. Then they discuss appearance. Trump derided Bannon on his way out as, quote, sloppy Steve. That might have been on their minds. It was somewhat recent. He says, oh, you looked so clean cut next to him. I thought I'd landed on the figure skating channel by accident, Epstein writes. Bannon replies in this email, quote, well, that's my come hither look. Kind of a banter. Epstein replies to that, quote, better than the usual come Hitler look. Bannon replies, ouch. They go on to make references to the channel, calling it the Soy Boy Network. Bannon says he wanted to be clean, not sloppy. Epstein, with the Soy Boy reference, which might mean, with their view of the perceived vibes of a place, journalists, whatever, replies closer to Toy Boy Winky Face. So you can see an almost comfort, or what some might call a playfulness between these two as they advise each other on media. What's interesting about that is, again, when you go through all these emails, you'll find out later that all of their machinations didn't necessarily work for them when it came to spinning the media on their key issues, and I'll read you that right now. Michael Wolff, author who has been we've seen his methods in this, and he has responded to criticisms that he seems to be kind of getting too close to his sources. At one point, he seems to talk to Epstein about having collateral or an ability to have a, quote, debt over a candidate, in this case, Donald Trump. But I've discussed this, other people have. That's not usually how journalists operate. But an interesting thing, if you actually look at the evidence, is then, after all of their back and forth and what seemingly was a close vibe or sourcing with Michael Wolff and Jeffrey Epstein at the time, the book comes out, and Epstein appears panicked. Remember, his biggest vulnerability was he was trying to, with Bannon, rehab his reputation, with others trying to distort and hide it. The documents we got from the Congress include not only the emails, but some other materials where you can see Google searches that they were trying to suppress and distort so that at least Epstein wanted his criminal history off the first page of Google results. Maybe he figured people don't go to the second page. So we know that was a really active thing. People said, what did his money and power buy him? It bought at these relationships, but also a kind of a distortion of reality itself. And then this Wolf book comes out, and Epstein writes to Bannon, I have now seen some of Wolf's book. Mentions me and underage prostitutes. That's a quote from Epstein. You as the man behind and in front of the curtain. Lots of Steve quotes, lots. Bannon sees that this is a problem. He replies, ugh, UGH, anything awful. I wish he hadn't done that. Why are you mentioned at all? If you were trying to rehabilitate Jeffrey Epstein, one thing you wouldn't do is a press strategy that gets him brought up again in a new current book. And we checked, Fire and Fury spent about 2 months on the top of the bestseller list that year. It's probable that more general public people in the population, learned about Epstein and his underage prostitute issue, or worse, from that book than anything else. And so this is where both things can be true. I mean, one thing you have to watch out for in life, and certainly in making sense of politics or media, is all these narratives. People say, oh, the Epstein Files are only bad for one party. Not true. Both parties are implicated. Oh, the Epstein Files show that this or that person was so bad because they only went in one direction. People can debate and criticize Wolf, but it's interesting, as a factual matter, if you were investigating this case, that while he seemed close to these people when they were trying to spin the press, in the end, he wrote things that rattled Epstein and clearly cut against him, and Epstein then confides in Bannon about it. And this brings me to one of the last emails. This one actually has gotten, I think, more attention than some of the others. And if you go through the search tool, and this is what investigators would do when you get a document production or discovery in cases they call it, and journalists do it all the time, this is just a much larger pile than usual. Some emails pop out and they kind of stand alone. But think about all this context of everything that's gone back and forth between these two men. And this is 1 week before Jeffrey Epstein was arrested by federal prosecutors in the Trump DOJ. Bill Barr was Attorney General at the time. The heat has obviously picked up. Epstein had dealt with the law before. He had the best lawyers money could buy. He, we would think, had some knowledge that the heat was building, because you don't just get arrested out of the blue in a case like this, and they contact people, and there's a grand jury impaneled, and so if you're the subject of that and you have high-priced lawyers, good chance you know about it. And that's the context, plus their past dealings, where Epstein believed that Bannon was basically on his side and redeeming him. 1 week before his arrest, thinking about leverage, Epstein writes to Bannon, quote, now you can understand why Trump wakes up in the middle of the night sweating when he hears you and I are friends. Now, we can't tell you, no one can say exactly what the intention is there, right? The words are the evidence, the intention is something you have to build with more evidence, and people can defend themselves and say, oh, that was just banter, that was this or that. But when you put it in the context of this history, that Epstein stands accused of blackmailing people, including by folks in Trump's orbit, that he had suspicious money come to him from individuals like Leon Black and others, I did a whole other breakdown on that he views Bannon as, he put it here, a friend and someone that has helped him at a time when others had iced him out, you have to ask, is this just an observation? Oh, Trump is scared of me. Is it just exaggeration and hope? Oh, we're friends. Or is it a type of threat? Is it a way of saying to Bannon so that he might say back to people in Trump's orbit before he's indicted, you know, this guy thinks he can take you down. He's talking about how he can take you down, and if they are looking into him, just keep that in mind. Now, Bannon is a shrewd person. He's been in and out of prison for a different case. He knows how law works. He's had some good lawyers. I've talked to him about law and other things, including that interview. So Bannon may avoid doing something that would look like meddling or illegal obstruction, right? You can't legally intervene in a federal case, and people get more and more cynical these days about what some of the government's getting away with. But remember, in the first term, the DOJ was still independent enough that after the Comey firing, you had an Attorney General Sessions who named a special counsel. That's how we got Mueller, who fought off Trump efforts to intervene. They weren't just indicting Trump's opponents left and right. So there was also a different time of independence, and Bannon had dealt with the Mueller probe, probably didn't want more legal heat. we would like to know, I think an investigative question, if you got these people under oath, and we have a lot more documents coming potentially, is did Bannon do anything with that information? Did anyone ever say back to the Trump DOJ threats, or Epstein says he can get the best of you, can quote, wakes up in the middle of the night sweating because, as he said in another email, he was the only one who could take Trump down. So that's some of what is striking about why a sex trafficker with this much of a problem was working so closely with a Trump ally who has only further ingratiated himself. Bannon, since that time, with the war room and his ties to Trump officials, is seen as a MAGA voice, even though him and Trump, they patched it up to some degree. I'm not suggesting that they were ever as close as they were in 2016. So that's the Bannon of it all. If you're watching this video and you say, okay, got that, good, fine. I am going to use this time as a breakdown because I like to go deeper here with you guys, and I've read some of the YouTube comments. You guys can always subscribe for my YouTube and these breakdowns, but I've read some of you saying, hey, let's go deeper and longer. This is a place to do it, right, and important stuff. So I mentioned these 5 topics. I'm just going to start with a couple and say that what you get from the Epstein Files will depend on how hard the Congress pushes across these categories. And so while people say, oh, everything we redacted, they'll give over nothing, this and that. Given the pressure they're under, the bipartisan pressure, and how Trump wants this to go away, that would be an extreme defiance that would immediately have problems for them in court. A middle ground might be, hey, we're giving you this but not that, or we're giving you this now, we need more time for that, etc. And so when I mention these buckets, they are topical, but they're also how lawyers who ultimately may be litigating this in court between these branches of government would look at something like this. The first case I mentioned is very old. It's when Epstein was accused in Florida, and then he got a deal that was so flawed that later a judge ruled that it was illegal, that the way the government prosecutors, then in the Bush era DOJ, had struck the deal and hid it from survivors, broke rules, didn't create a new crime, but broke the legal rules, broke the law about the protections that survivors get in these situations. In other cases, they have what's called a victim impact statement. Victims in our justice system have legal recognition. Sometimes about sentencing, sometimes about being heard, sometimes about being held anonymous. You probably heard about that. And so that's how bad the deal was. And so it would be very hard, I will tell you, for the DOJ to say, oh, that closed case about this dead guy from 2006 can't possibly be disclosed. And I don't think a judge would look kindly to that. And that questions there don't just touch on, say, a lot of the recent issues around Epstein's crimes and Donald Trump, but also what was, according to many, a corrupted system. Alex Acosta, the controversial prosecutor, later rewarded by Trump, put in his cabinet. Ken Starr was a big figure, now deceased, who was I've interviewed him as well, and he was, of course, the special counsel who went after the Clinton impeachment era. Epstein paid him, hired him as a high-priced lawyer who had these Republican DOJ connections. And so you want to look at those files and figure out whether everyone, no matter how terrible you think they are, even accused murderers get legal representation, even if they can't afford it. People know about that yet, right? It's the Constitution, the movies, the rest of it. But whether these lawyers or anyone around them went farther than the legal representation and pulled strings or had any malfeasance, threat, or otherwise, given that Trump's own cabinet members, Cabinet member Lutnick talking about this, that's a big question. So that's a category where I would say the legal hook to get that material is strong. The arguments against it are weak. It's the old case. And the results may not endanger the way some people look at this, oh, only the current president, although we don't know, but the history at the DOJ. The second category is the obvious big one, all of Epstein's conduct and crimes. And I would say the legal rationale to get that is high. The arguments against it are stronger than the first one because while Pam Bondi famously announced that there was nothing else to investigate because they already looked into it, nothing related to future other cases against people, nor blackmail, she then reversed herself. So you could go to court and a judge could say, no, you already said these are closed cases, turn it over. The law, which has now been written by Congress, signed by this president, is to turn it over. Another judge might say, well, if it is an open case, there's a lot of precedent that says you don't turn stuff over in the middle of an open case. And which stuff, of course, is a whole other convo. And so I would say, again, getting into the detail, that is important, but it is potentially a little harder to get. That relates to category 3, which is other people. The emails are kind of scattershot, and some of it makes people look really bad, but legally, that doesn't mean they committed a crime, and you need wider evidence and fact-finding. The emails also are arbitrary. It's just a certain period of time that the estate had and to hand it over. We have every reason to believe that the government at the DOJ has far more than the Epstein estate. The Epstein estate just has what this individual, up until his death, had, and the lawyers there, as we saw, appeared to cooperate. They turned over materials. That's how you got the birthday card and these emails. But that's, again, arbitrary. Whether there's other material that Epstein, for example, had already deleted or erased, physical evidence, if there's videos, metadata, flight logs, other things that aren't just in the estate tranche that the DOJ has, that could show in a much more comprehensive way other people. And it may be, in all fairness, and lawyers look at this all the time, that something looks bad, but they couldn't charge it. So then the public will look at it and say, why didn't you charge it? And that's one of the reasons why historically the law generally favors confidentiality for people who were investigated and not charged. Indeed, if you think back over the last few years, different cases and James Comey and all that, that topic has come up a lot. But remember, that's just the law. Congress, spurred only by public pressure, has decided that there's a different balance here. That the law now, unlike most cases where if you're investigated and they don't charge, you're confidential, this one is of such high import that Congress is taking a different approach. We have a different law now. That's different than last week. And I got to tell you, I'm obviously involved in reporting on this and interested in it, but it's pretty striking to think that the public pressure did lead to the demands for transparency. You just have to play it out. So those are 3 of the categories. The next category I want to get into is a whole subject unto itself, which is the death in custody of Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm going to do that in a future video all by itself. I will read the comments. Again, you guys can subscribe to my YouTube if you guys have views or questions about what I'm calling these 5 categories and what you want to know about the next one. I'll look at some of those, at least the top comments that I can see. Sometimes there's thousands on the death in custody. And then the last category, which is internal DOJ communications, which, as I mentioned at the top of this video, implicates the current Trump DOJ, which stands credibly accused of a cover-up, leniency for the only person in jail for Epstein's crimes, Maxwell, contradicting statements. And that's a lot on Trump DOJ. But remember, that's Trump DOJ. There are also questions about how the Biden administration and DOJ dealt with this. The Attorney General Garland Justice Department, they had the files for 4 years. They didn't release any of them. They did the review of Epstein's in-custody death. That happened under the Trump DOJ, and they faced the initial questions about what happened. But then the Inspector General report and other materials were reviewed and basically processed, overlapping with part of the Biden DOJ. And so if they did a bang-up job, fine. But if the Congress wants to review that in the same way, if you remember the January 6th committee or the 9/11 committee, where you review what a government has done, that may raise big questions about the Biden DOJ. And if you go back further, you have Clinton being tied to Epstein. You have other Democratic operatives and lawyers tied to this. And so there may be a lot of different people, elites and government veterans, who would rather this just go away. And it doesn't mean it's all on a scale of just guilt by association, but those 2 categories I mentioned, the death and internal DOJ deliberations, actions, and inaction across multiple administrations, I'm going to capture that, try to tackle some of that in the next video. Those are part of the Epstein file demands. Okay, this was a long one. Ari Melber signing off. Thanks for your interest. Subscribe and stay informed.